Breaking news! The presidential election has been decided. It's only taken 16 weeks to settle the electoral vote count. Now, I'm not talking about the 2000 Bush-Gore election or even the 2020 Trump-Biden election. No, this was the election of 1876, and for a month, an ad hoc commission argued over who should be president of the United States. Republican Rutherford B. Hayes or Democrat Samuel Tilden. It took close to 4 months to find out who would be the 19th President of the United States. Now, the Republicans held their convention on June 14th to June 16th. The convention whittled down a field of 9 candidates until it was just the front-runner, James G. Blaine and Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, he came from behind as a dark horse candidate. To win the nomination, a candidate needed to win 378 delegates. By the 7th ballot, Hayes had edged Blaine out by 384 to 351. Now, 11 days later, from June 27th to the 29th, the Democrats held their convention in St. Louis. In an 8-candidate field, Tilden held the commanding lead on the first ballot, but he did not get the required 492 votes. By the second ballot, Tilden received 534. Unlike Hayes, who came from behind, Tilden had no real serious competition. Each candidate was considered honest and above board. There were no hidden agendas. Hayes wanted to reform the corrupt civil service, while Tilden pledged to fight overall political corruption. So how did this country get into this mess in the first place? Well, back then, candidates did not campaign openly for the office of president. They stayed above the fray, as they say, and relied upon surrogates to campaign for them. And the surrogates did go to work. The election of 1876 was contentious and a mudslinger. The Democrats accused Republicans of being the party of corruption due to the many corrupt charges laid at the Grant administration's feet, while the Republicans waved the figurative bloody shirt at the Democrats. This was a campaign tactic calling for the country to avenge the bloodshed of the soldiers that died in the Civil War, as well as the suggestion that the Democratic Party was the party of traitors. And the saying of the time was, not all Democrats were rebels, but all rebels were Democrats. Many citizens still thought of the Democrats as the party of traitors. Okay, so the Republicans also connected Tilden to Tammany Hall. That was the Democratic machine of New York, known for its corruption. Ironically, it was Tilden who was part of the reform group which broke Boss Tweed's hold over New York Democratic politics. Boss Tweed was corrupt. He never made an honest dollar in his life. Now, from the end of the political convention up to the election day, the minions of each candidate went to work trying to destroy the reputation of the candidates. So, who were these political operatives? Well, it was the Fourth Estate, the newspapers, the gentlemen of the press. You know, the free, unbiased press. Newspapers were highly partisan at this time. Now, the July 20th, 1876 edition of the Stark County Democrat quoted Joseph Pulitzer, one of the 2 leading yellow journalism publishers of the day. Hayes' nomination means no change, but rather a continuation of the present Republican Party in power, with its present tendencies possibly even greater rascality than Grant had fastened upon the country. Now, the Daily Kennebunk Journal, August 22, 1876 edition, ran a story connecting Tilden to a railroad land and stock fraud scheme. The Southern Indiana Railroad was a concern that fell into Samuel Tilden's net. Tilden and one trustee were entrusted with company bonds worth $10 million. The proceeds of the bonds and whatever else could be skimmed from the road went into the pockets of Mr. Tilden and his associates. Now, not to be outdone, the Eaton Democrat, Eaton, Ohio, October 12, 1876 edition stated, "If Hayes is elected, it will be but a continuation of the present administration. Hard times and thieves in office." The Grant administration had been plagued by graft and corruption. Plus, during the end of his second term, the country was going through a major economic downturn. Now, throughout these campaigns, these partisan attacks on both candidates were carried out by the press under the guise of just reporting events. Republicans, September 20th, 1876, ran a story titled, "Tilden and State Sovereignty." A prominent judge named Underwood stated, "I have known Tilden for 20 years. I know he holds the opinion that the war was unconstitutional. I've heard him declare in conversations with myself near the close of the war that every man of the Union Army that marched across the Southern soil was a trespasser and liable to a suit for damages." The Lake Charles Echo in Louisiana, October 19th, 1876, reran a story from the Chicago Times titled "Ridiculous Testimony." These recent exposés of the failure of Governor Hayes to make honest tax returns to the assessor of Sandusky County have been told with alarming effect. Those who have stood by immaculate Rutherford during his long public career find a host of excuses to offer in defense of his acts, which have just come to light. All are in the same boat. It should not be to wonder at they published affidavits and announced that Hayes has done nothing wrong. Yeah, nothing changes. I mean, geez, look at the shows today. Okay, I digress. So, what we have here is one candidate who cheats on his taxes and another candidate who does not believe in the United States. So, the campaigns say. You know that scenario does sound oddly familiar. By election day, though, each candidate was confident he would be the next president of the United States. The people went to the polls, and as with any presidential election, there was excitement in the air. What direction was the country going to take? Continue with another 4 years under Republicans as the president, or change course and elect Samuel Tilden, the champion of the gold standard, civil service reform, and lower taxes? The country would know in a few days. Right. The popular vote was counted by November 9th. The Leavenworth Weekly Times ran the headline, "The returns up to 3:30 a.m. more favorable to the Republicans and strongly indicate the election of Hayes and Wheeler. California, Oregon, Wisconsin, South Carolina, and probably Florida go Republican." Now, the November 10th edition of the Wheeling Daily Register reported at this writing, 1 o'clock a.m., the situation remains substantially unchanged. Governor Tilden has 184 votes, but one short of election. Conceded to him on all hands, and all evidence goes to show that he has a good majority in Louisiana and a small majority in South Carolina and Florida. The latest dispatches throw doubt upon California having gone Republican. And there is not enough to convince us that Oregon has cast her votes for Hayes. Meanwhile, behind the scenes on election night, Republican Party Chairman Zachariah Chandler believed Hayes had lost. The electoral count was Tilden 184, Hayes 165. Tilden only needed one more electoral vote to have the required 185 votes to win the election. Now, seeing the election was as good as over, Chandler went to bed. However, events were shaping up in 3 southern states, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, which could possibly swing the election over to Hayes. Now, early morning on November 9th, William Chandler, no relation to Zachariah Chandler, a newspaper editor in New Hampshire, and John Reed, managing editor of the New York Times, informed Zachariah Chandler that Hayes could win the election as long as the Republicans could hold on to Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. In each state, the returning boards had to certify the popular vote count. The Republicans controlled the returning boards in each state. Now, in his book, Reunion Reaction, The Compromise of 1877 and the End of Reconstruction, C. Van Woodward wrote, Zachariah Chandler authorized William Chandler and John Reed to telegraph the Republican leaders in each state and ask them if they could hold on to their state for Hayes. The meaning was clear to the 3 individual Republican state leaders. Do whatever you have to keep your state in the Hayes win column. Now, when the Democratic Party chairman Abram S. Hewitt got wind of this, he immediately went on the offensive. First, he sent out teams of prominent, well-known Democrats to go into the 3 states and make sure the canvassing boards counted all votes. Then, the next step he took was a counterpunch to Chandler. You see, the 3 electoral votes of Oregon had gone to Hayes. Even though the governor was Democratic, the state had gone for Hayes. One of the electors was a federal employee. John W. Watts was a United States postmaster. Therefore, under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution, which states, no person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. He was ineligible to be an elector. Didn't these people ever read the Constitution? All right, anyway, so Abrams ordered Governor Grover to reject Watts as an elector and to certify the person with the next highest votes, C.A. Cronin, a Democrat, as the elector. Now, if Chandler cried foul and ordered an investigation, Abrams could then call into question the legitimacy of the canvassing boards in Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. Now, with the constitutional crisis in the making, now President Grant decided to get involved in the mess by sending a group of Republican observers down to each of the 3 states to keep an eye on the Democratic observers. C. Van Wood stated in his book, Evidence of Dishonesty, the culpabilities of the members of these canvassing boards, especially in Louisiana, is still pungent in the musty records of the 70s. Likewise, there is ample evidence of irregularities, fraud, intimidation, and violence on the part of both Republicans and Democrats in the election that the returning boards were to canvass. In some cases, there was little to choose between the methods used by both of the 2 parties. The political minions went to work in the 3 contested states. Votes from whole precincts were thrown out arbitrarily. In Florida, the Johnsonville and the Darbyville precincts were thrown away because there was a suggestion, not evidence, a suggestion of voter intimidation in Johnsonville, and a suggestion, again, no evidence, just a suggestion of illegal votes being cast in Darbyville. There was no evidence, just a suggestion. All right, it seems each party was determined to stale this election fair and square. Now, by November 17th, the accusations were flying. The Associated Press printed a letter to the American people from leading Republicans about foul play in Florida. The Democrats in Florida allegedly threw out some votes on a false pretense of fraud in Alachua County, thereby giving Tilden a clear majority. However, officially, the electoral vote stood at Tilden 184 electoral votes, 1 shy of 185 needed to be elected president, and Hayes had 165 votes. Hayes needed all 3 southern states and Oregon to win the election. December 6, 1876, the electors meet in their state capitals to cast their ballots. Now, in Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, both the Democrats and the Republican slates of electors assembled and cast conflicting votes, while in Oregon, Watts and Cronin both cast ballots. The constitutional crisis is real, since each of these 4 states sent 2 different electoral returns to Washington. It would be up to the President pro tem to decide who would be president. The question was, constitutionally, did he actually have the authority to decide which electors to accept? Now, the Albany Register believed this was the case. The December 8th issue printed this article. There seems to be a wide difference of opinion as to the power of the President of the U.S. Senate in the matter of the presidential vote. Now, the Constitution says the President of the Senate shall open all the certificates in the presence of the Senate and the House, and the votes shall be counted. If past usage is to govern the next count, the President of the Senate has the power and will decide who is President-elect for the coming 4 years. Now, the Memphis Daily Appeal published this article on December 9th, addressed by the Democratic Committee to Congress, to the Honorable Samuel J. Randall, Washington, D.C., and to the House of Representatives. The undersigned, who came hither to be present at a fair count of the votes cast by the people of Florida, have had the grief to be witness of the counting out of Tilden electors chosen and of the counting in of Hayes electors rejected at the polls. We have witnessed the progress and consummation of a deliberate, preconcerted scheme of fraud. This scheme, first contrived for execution at the ballot box throughout the state, have fallen short of the success, when then continued and prompted by the several county canvassing boards, and was yesterday supplemented and finished by the radical majorities of the State Board of Canvassers at the State House. It is manifested to every intelligent observer here. Talk about verbose. By now, it was becoming obvious Congress had to step in and clean up the mess. Now, the 44th United States Congress met in a lame duck session on December 7th, the day after the disputed electoral votes were submitted. The major problem was who would count the votes and certify the election. The 12th Amendment states the President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes as president shall be president. Some people would say the President of the Senate did not have the authority to declare a winner in the disputed election. Just announce the vote number. So, on December 21st and 22nd, respectively, the Senate and House established special committees charged with establishing a process to resolve this dispute. The commission was made up of 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans. 5 senators and 5 representatives were chosen for the committee, as well as 5 Supreme Court justices. Now, the commission met on February 1st, 1877. The Republicans argued that the federal government didn't have the authority to violate state sovereignty by questioning the validity of the individual certified state electors. The Democrats argued it was the responsibility of the federal government to investigate the certification of state electors and reverse any certification if necessary. Now, the commission heard testimony from all the people involved from all 4 states. The final report of the commission was over 300 pages long. The end result was Hayes was to be awarded all 20 electoral votes from the 4 states. But this was not to be the end of the crisis. Many Democrats in Congress were determined to stop the steal. On March 1st, 1877, both houses met in joint session to certify the electors. The first objection came from Abraham Hewitt, the Democratic National Committee chairman, through his surrogate on the floor. He made an obvious false claim against the electors from Vermont. Both houses adjourned to the respective chambers to debate the objection. The Senate gave little credence to the objection and overruled it quickly. In the House, it was a different story. For 12 hours, they debated the objection. Once it was overruled, the joint session of Congress reconvened. This time, the Democrats objected to the electoral votes from Wisconsin. The filibuster looked like they would keep going. Each time an objection was raised about a slate of electors, both houses had to adjourn to their respective chambers and debate the objection. Now, with just 2 days to spare, a constitutional crisis was avoided and a peaceful transfer of power would take place. At 4:10 a.m. on March 2nd, it was announced that Rutherford B. Hayes was the president-elect. However, before the ink was even dry on the electoral certification, rumors started to come out that a compromise was made in order to stop the Democratic filibusters against the electors in Congress. Now, there is very little primary source documentation that a compromise was reached. I mean, this is Washington, D.C. we are talking about. Even back in 1877, rumors, innuendos, insinuations, and inferences abound. Could there have been a gentleman's agreement between the parties? Who knows? But again, this is Washington, D.C. Anything is possible, and there is no way I'm going to open that can of worms. It is true that Hayes did pull the last of the federal troops out of the South and officially end Reconstruction, but he had promised that during his campaign. Now, if there was a compromise, and I believe there was, I don't think it was hammered out among our elected representatives. More than likely, it was the power brokers of the day. They were the National Party chairmen, Chandler and Hewitt, who most likely reached a gentleman's agreement that stopped the filibuster and made Hayes president. Now, to avoid another electoral debacle, Congress passed the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Now, the act sets out procedures and deadlines for the states to follow in resolving disputes, certifying results, and sending the results to Congress. If a state follows these safe harbor standards and the state's governor properly submits one set of electoral votes, the act states that this is final. The act states that this final determination shall govern. This act does allow Congress to intervene, but only if a governor has certified 2 different slates of electors, or if a state fails to certify its results under the Act's procedures. Congress may also reject votes under the Act for other specific defects, such as ministerial error, or if an elector or candidate is ineligible for office, or if the Electoral College votes were not regularly given. So, what is the takeaway from this slice of election history? Don't believe everything in the news media about elections. Don't believe what the party hacks say or write. And more importantly, history does repeat itself. If we don't learn from our mistakes, we're in trouble. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and want to see more, then hit the like button. Please subscribe to my channel and ring the bell. As always, thank you for watching.